The clock on my nightstand glowed 2:47 a.m. when my eyes suddenly snapped open. For the first time in 18 years, I was awake in the middle of the night. The sleeping pill bottle sat there on my nightstand, but tonight, something had gone wrong. Or maybe something had finally gone right, because the space next to me in our California king bed was empty, and from somewhere downstairs, I could hear my husband Brad's voice, low and urgent, speaking words that would change everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I'm April Meyer, and I'm 35 years old, though some days I feel like I've lived 100 years in the past few months. For nearly 2 decades, I've been married to Brad, the man I met in college, who swept me off my feet with his charm and promises of a perfect life together. We live in a beautiful suburban home in Connecticut, the kind with the white picket fence that looks like something out of a magazine. You know the type, where everything looks perfect from the outside, but inside, well, that's where the real story lives. Before I continue, I want to thank you all for being here with me today. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Please drop a comment below. It really helps me. Now, let me take you back to how this all started. The sleeping pills began innocent enough. About 18 years ago, right after our wedding, Brad started mentioning how my restless sleep was affecting his work performance. He was climbing the corporate ladder at an investment firm, and every morning he'd mention how my tossing and turning kept him up. Being the supportive wife I thought I should be, I went to see Dr. Harrison, who prescribed me mild sleeping pills. Brad was so helpful, always making sure I took them with my evening tea, saying he just wanted us both to get proper rest. Sweet, right? That's what I thought too. But that night, that one night when my body somehow fought through the medication, everything shifted. As I lay there in the darkness, my heart pounding like I'd run a marathon, I realized something terrifying. In 18 years of marriage, I had never once been conscious during the nighttime hours. Not once had I woken up to use the bathroom, get a glass of water, or even from a bad dream. The pills had kept me in such a deep sleep that 8 hours would pass like seconds. And now, listening to Brad's voice drifting up from his home office, speaking in hushed tones about transfers and she'll never know, I understood that maybe, just maybe, that had been the point all along. I slipped out of bed as quietly as possible, grateful for the thick carpet that muffled my footsteps. My fuzzy slippers, the ones with the ridiculous bunny ears that my sister had given me last Christmas as a joke, made me feel like some sort of discount detective. Here I was, April Meyer, suburban housewife turned midnight spy, creeping through my own home like a teenager sneaking past her parents. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was technically sneaking past my husband, except this time, the stakes were so much higher than being grounded. The stairs in our house have this particular pattern of creaks that I'd memorized over the years, though I'd never tested this knowledge in the dead of night. Step, skip the third one, hug the right side of the fifth, avoid the seventh completely. It was like some twisted hopscotch game where losing meant potentially destroying my marriage, though, as I would soon discover, that marriage was already built on foundations shakier than these old stairs. Brad's office door was cracked open, unusual since he was meticulous about keeping it locked. Through the gap, blue light from multiple computer screens painted strange shadows on the walls. I'd always wondered why he needed 3 monitors for his work. He'd said something about tracking international markets, and I'd nodded along, playing the role of the trusting wife who didn't understand complex financial matters. Funny how we sometimes choose ignorance because it's more comfortable than asking difficult questions. What I saw when I peered through that crack made my blood run cold. Brad wasn't checking international markets. He was logged into bank accounts, multiple ones, with balances that made my head spin. But here's the kicker. They all had my name on them, April Meyer. Accounts I had never opened, never seen, never even knew existed. His fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced ease, transferring funds between accounts like he was playing some elaborate shell game. Then I heard him speak into his Bluetooth earpiece, and I had to bite my lip to keep from gasping. Victoria, yes, she's completely out. The dose I gave her tonight was a bit stronger, just to be safe. We can move forward with phase 3. He laughed then, this cold chuckle I'd never heard from him before. 18 years of this, and she still takes those pills like clockwork. Sometimes I almost feel bad for her. Almost. My legs felt like jelly as I backed away from the door. This wasn't my husband talking. This couldn't be the man who brought me flowers every Friday, who slow danced with me in the kitchen while dinner cooked, who held my hand during scary movies. But as I crept back upstairs, my mind racing faster than my heart, pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed started falling into place. The monthly business trips Brad took to Boston, always lasting exactly 3 days, always returning with expensive gifts and elaborate explanations about boring conferences. The way he insisted on handling all our finances because numbers stressed me out. How he'd encouraged me to quit my job at the marketing firm 5 years ago, saying he earned enough for both of us. Even the way my mother-in-law, Janet, always asks strange questions about our savings, questions that seemed too specific to be casual curiosity. God, had she known all along? I made it back to bed and forced myself to lie still, to breathe evenly, to play the part of the sedated wife. But inside, I was screaming. Who was Victoria? What was phase 3? And most importantly, what else had been happening during all those nights I'd been unconscious? As Brad's footsteps eventually climbed the stairs, I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed my racing heart wouldn't give me away. He slipped into bed beside me, and I felt him lean over, checking that I was deeply asleep. His satisfied sigh made my skin crawl. The next morning, I deserved an Oscar for my performance. I woke up groggy, as always, accepting Brad's kiss on the forehead and his cheerful, morning, sleeping beauty without flinching. He made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, my favorite, while chatting about his day ahead. Board meetings, client lunches, the usual. I nodded and smiled, all while my mind replayed the previous night like a horror movie on loop. That evening, I made a decision that terrified me. When Brad handed me my sleeping pill with my chamomile tea, I perfected a magician's sleight of hand I didn't know I possessed. The pill went under my tongue instead of down my throat, and later, when he wasn't looking, I spit it into a tissue. This became my nightly ritual. Pretend to take the pill, fake the drowsiness, stumble to bed playing the part of the heavily medicated wife. What I discovered over the next few weeks would have been fascinating if it wasn't so deeply disturbing. Brad had a routine, precise as a Swiss watch. He would wait exactly 45 minutes after my supposed pill-taking before even moving. He'd test me first, calling my name softly, then louder, sometimes even shaking my shoulder. I learned to stay limp, to keep my breathing deep and even, though every fiber of my being wanted to confront him right then and there. But I needed evidence, real solid proof of whatever twisted game he was playing. So I became a detective in my own home, though admittedly not a very good one at first. There was the night I tried to follow him downstairs and knocked over the hallway vase. Thank God for my quick thinking and mumbling about needing the bathroom. Or the time I attempted to use my phone to record him and accidentally turned on the flashlight instead. I swear, Nancy Drew never had these problems. The receipts I found hidden in his jacket pockets told a story of their own. Hotels in Boston, yes, but also charges for 2 at restaurants, jewelry stores with purchases that never made their way to me. There was a second phone, too, discovered when I accidentally knocked his gym bag over, a cheap burner phone, the kind you see in crime shows. When I powered it on while he showered, I found dozens of messages from Victoria, I presumed. They spoke in code mostly, but certain phrases stood out. The wife, the timeline, final transfer, and most chillingly, just like the others. Others, plural. The word echoed in my mind as I quickly photographed the messages before replacing the phone. What others? Who else had Brad done this to? Or was he running this scam on multiple women simultaneously? The thought made me physically ill, and I had to rush to the bathroom, playing it off as something I ate when Brad showed concern. His gentle pat on my back as I heaved felt like spiders crawling on my skin. The parallel dramas in my life weren't helping my stress levels either. Janet, my mother-in-law, had suddenly developed an intense interest in our financial planning. She'd call during the day when Brad was at work, asking about our retirement funds, our investment portfolios, whether we had proper life insurance. A mother worries, she'd say with this syrupy, sweet voice that never reached her eyes. Once she even suggested I should give Brad full power of attorney, just in case something happens. The way she said it made me wonder if she was threatening or warning me. The puzzle pieces finally formed a complete picture on a rainy Thursday night, exactly 1 month after my first unexpected awakening. Brad was on another business trip, giving me the freedom to truly investigate without fear of discovery. Armed with the passwords I'd watched him type, thank God for his habit of pecking at keys with 2 fingers, I accessed our home computer and dove deep into our financial records. What I found made my discovery of the secret bank accounts look like child's play. Brad had been slowly, methodically draining my inheritance account, the one my grandmother had left me, the one that was supposed to be untouchable until I turned 40. Except somehow he'd been making withdrawals, small enough to go unnoticed individually, but adding up to nearly $500,000 over the years. The signatures on the withdrawal forms were mine, but I knew with bone-deep certainty that I'd never signed them. Those nights when I was unconscious, he hadn't just been managing secret accounts, he'd been using my sedated state to forge my signature on document after document. The scope of his deception was breathtaking. He'd taken out credit cards in my name, loans I never knew existed, even a second mortgage on a property I apparently owned in Vermont. Vermont! I'd never even been to Vermont. Each transaction happened during my pill-induced unconsciousness, each signature forged while I lay there like a breathing corpse in our marital bed. The man I'd shared my life with had turned me into his personal ATM, and I'd been too drugged to notice. But the real kicker came when I found the email account. Brad had created an email address so similar to mine that most people wouldn't notice the difference. April Meyer versus April Meyer. Through this account, he'd been corresponding with financial advisors, lawyers, and investment brokers, all believing they were communicating with me. In these emails, I had given Brad complete control over my assets, praised his financial acumen, and even stated multiple times that I trusted him completely with all monetary decisions due to my severe anxiety around financial matters. I had to laugh at that one. A bitter, hollow sound in the empty house. Anxiety around financial matters? The only anxiety I had was from discovering my husband had been robbing me blind for almost 2 decades while keeping me drugged into compliance. The phone calls with Victoria made more sense now. I'd managed to record a few on my phone, hiding it in various spots around the house like some paranoid spy. Victoria wasn't just a business partner or an affair partner. She was his accomplice in what appeared to be a massive fraud scheme. They discussed packages being moved, clients being prepped, and timeline for something they kept calling the big one. From what I could piece together, they were planning something major in 2 weeks, something that would involve moving everything offshore and, from the sounds of it, disappearing. She's been perfect, Brad had said in one recording, presumably about me. 18 years of prep work, and she never suspected a thing. After this, we can move on to the next mark. I've already got my eye on a widow in Philadelphia. Same profile, inherited wealth, trusting nature, family estrangement, 6 months to romance her, maybe a year to get married. Then we run the same playbook. My blood ran cold. The same playbook, which meant, oh God, I wasn't his first victim. Those others mentioned in the text messages weren't hypothetical. They were real women, possibly lying in their own beds right now, taking sleeping pills prescribed by caring husbands, never knowing their lives were being stolen from them, one forged signature at a time. If you're finding this story as shocking as I did living it, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Your support truly helps me share these important stories, and I promise, what comes next is something you won't want to miss. The revelation that I was part of a pattern, not a singular victim, changed everything. This wasn't just about saving myself anymore. This was about stopping a predator who had turned marriage into a weapon and medication into chains. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed help, and I knew exactly who to call, even if it meant swallowing my pride and admitting I'd been a fool. My sister Rebecca and I hadn't spoken in 3 years. The falling out was over Brad, of course. She'd never trusted him, called him too smooth, like butter sliding off hot plastic. At my wedding, she'd pulled me aside and asked if I was absolutely sure, and I'd told her to mind her own business. Pride is a funny thing. It can keep you from the very people who could save you. But when I called her at 2 a.m. from a burner phone I'd bought at a gas station, she answered on the second ring like she'd been waiting for this call for 18 years. April, What's wrong? No hello, no surprise at the late hour, just immediate concern. That's when I broke down crying in my car, parked in a 24-hour grocery store parking lot like some kind of suburban runaway. Through sobbing gasps, I told her everything. The pills, the forgeries, Victoria, the other victims. The silence on her end grew so long I thought she'd hung up. But then she said 5 words that changed everything. I'm a prosecutor now, April. Turns out, while I'd been playing drugged housewife, Rebecca had built a career specializing in financial fraud and domestic abuse cases. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Within 48 hours, she had assembled what she called the team, a forensic accountant who looked like somebody's grandmother but could track money like a bloodhound, a private investigator who specialized in bigamy and marriage fraud, and a federal agent who'd been tracking someone matching Victoria's description for years. Your husband isn't just a con artist, Rebecca told me over coffee in her office, surrounded by boxes of evidence we'd been gathering. He's part of something bigger. This Victoria? We think she's Victoria Chen, wanted in 3 states for identity theft, fraud, and running a ring that specifically targets wealthy women through marriage scams. The plan we developed was equal parts brilliant and terrifying. I would continue playing the sedated wife while secretly documenting everything. Rebecca got me these tiny cameras disguised as buttons, the kind that would make James Bond jealous. Though I'll admit, trying to sew them onto my pajamas without Brad noticing was like performing surgery with oven mitts. There was one night where I accidentally sewed my sleeve to my pants and had to pretend I was having a reaction to the sleeping pills when Brad found me stumbling around trying to separate them. Maybe we should lower your dose, he'd said with fake concern. If only he knew I hadn't taken a real pill in weeks. The forensic accountant, Martha, and yes, she insisted I call her Martha, not Mrs. Williams, discovered something that made my situation even more urgent. Brad had been setting up a final transfer, moving all the stolen funds to an account in the Cayman Islands. The transfer was scheduled for exactly 2 weeks from when we started working together, which meant we had a rapidly closing window to stop him. But here's where it got interesting. The account required 2 signatures for transfers over $1 million, and guess whose forged signature would be the second one? He needs you unconscious one more time, Martha explained, pushing her reading glasses up her nose. The final transfer requires biometric confirmation, a thumbprint scan on a special reader. He's probably planning to use your thumb while you're knocked out. The technical side of building our trap was honestly hilarious in hindsight. Here I was, a woman who could barely operate our smart TV, suddenly learning about keystroke loggers, Jeeps trackers, and encrypted communications. Rebecca had to talk me through installing tracking software on Brad's laptop, which involved me crawling under his desk at 3 a.m., trying to plug in a USB device while he slept upstairs. I felt like a middle-aged Mission Impossible reject, especially when I got stuck under the desk and had to wiggle out backwards, knocking over his pencil holder in the process. But the real shock came when the private investigator, a former cop named Tony, who looked like he'd stepped out of a 1970s detective show, complete with the mustache, uncovered Brad's history. My husband had been married twice before. Both women were wealthy, both had developed severe insomnia requiring medication, and both had lost significant amounts of money before their divorces. The first wife, Sandra, was now living in a small apartment in Detroit, having lost her family's fortune. The second, Monica, had actually died, officially from an accidental overdose of sleeping medication. I tracked down Sandra, Tony told me, sliding a phone number across the table. She's willing to talk, but April, prepare yourself. Her story. It's going to sound very familiar. The call with Sandra was like talking to a future version of myself who'd lost everything. She'd taken sleeping pills for 12 years, discovered Brad's deception only when a bank error led to her being contacted directly, and by then, he'd already moved most of her assets. The worst part, she said, her voice hollow, wasn't losing the money. It was realizing that every kiss, every I love you, every anniversary celebration was just him maintaining his investment. We're not wives to him, April. We're just accounts to be emptied. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law Janet was circling like a vulture. She'd started dropping by unexpectedly during the day, always when Brad was at work. "Just checking on you, dear," she'd say, but her eyes would scan the house like she was taking inventory. One day, I pretended to be deeply affected by my medication and acted loopy. That's when she let her guard down, muttering to herself while going through our mail, "Brad better hurry up. I'm not getting any younger, and that assisted living facility in Boca isn't going to pay for itself." So Janet was in on it too. Her own son was drugging and robbing his wife, and her main concern was her retirement plan. I wanted to throw my supposedly drowsy self at her and scream, but instead I played up the medication effects even more, stumbling and slurring my words. "Oh, you poor thing," she cooed with fake sympathy. "Brad really should increase your dose. You seem to be building a tolerance." The night of the final transfer arrived faster than expected. Brad came home early from his business trip, really just 3 days at a hotel with Victoria planning their getaway, with flowers and my favorite Chinese takeout. "I've been thinking," he said over dinner, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We should take a vacation after my big project wraps up. Somewhere tropical, just the two of us." "Yeah, right. Just one of us, more likely, while the other rotted in a tropical prison or worse." But I smiled and nodded, playing with my lo mein while the button camera on my blouse recorded everything. "That sounds wonderful, honey. I've been feeling so tired lately. A vacation would be perfect." "Speaking of tired," he said right on cue, pulling out my pill bottle, "let's make sure you get a good night's sleep. Big day tomorrow. I have that important meeting, remember?" There was no meeting, of course. Tomorrow was transfer day, the day he planned to steal the remaining $2 million from my accounts and disappear with Victoria. I took the pill with practiced ease, even making a show of swallowing it with my entire glass of water. Brad watched carefully, satisfied when I gave him a drowsy smile. "I think I'll head up early," I murmured, adding a little stumble as I stood. "Love you." "Love you too, sleeping beauty," he replied, and for just a moment I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt? Regret? Or just satisfaction that his mark was playing her role perfectly? I'd never know, and honestly, I didn't care anymore. 45 minutes later, right on schedule, Brad crept into our bedroom with his tablet and a small electronic device, the thumbprint scanner, I assumed. I lay perfectly still as he tested my consciousness, calling my name, shaking my shoulder more roughly than usual. He was nervous tonight. I could smell the sweat mixed with his cologne. When he was satisfied I was unconscious, he pulled out his phone. "Victoria, I'm starting now. Get to the house in 15 minutes. We'll do the transfer here, then go straight to the airport." He paused, listening. "No, she's completely out." I gave her an extra dose, mixed it with her wine at dinner without her noticing. Wine I hadn't drunk, hiding it in my napkin and the potted plant next to my chair. But Brad didn't know that, just like he didn't know about the FBI agent stationed outside, the cameras recording everything, or my sister waiting in the guest room with a federal warrant. Brad grabbed my hand, pressing my thumb to the scanner. The device beeped and he quickly moved to his tablet, fingers flying across the screen as he initiated the transfer. That's when the doorbell rang. He froze, looking at his phone in confusion. "You're early," he muttered, heading downstairs to let in what he thought was Victoria. The moment he left the room, I sat up, pulling out my phone to text Rebecca. He's opening the door now. What happened next was like watching a beautiful symphony of justice. Brad opened the door, but instead of Victoria, there stood 2 FBI agents with badges gleaming under our porch light. "Bradley Meyer, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, identity theft, forgery, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." "There must be some mistake," Brad started, his charm turned up to maximum. "I'm just a financial advisor having a late meeting with a colleague." "That colleague wouldn't be Victoria Chen, would it?" the second agent asked. "Because we just arrested her in the parking lot of the Marriott downtown. She's been very chatty about your operation." I couldn't resist. I walked down the stairs, fully awake and coherent, watching Brad's face cycle through confusion, shock, and finally pure rage as he realized what had happened. "Hi, honey," I said sweetly. "Trouble sleeping?" "Me too. Haven't taken those pills in months, actually. They were giving me the strangest dreams. Dreams about you stealing my money, forging my signature, planning to disappear with your accomplice." "April, I can explain," he started, but I held up my hand. Oh, please do explain. Explain it all to the federal agents. Explain it to Sandra and Monica's family. Explain it to the jury at your trial. I turned to the agents. The evidence you need is on his tablet upstairs, his computer in the office, and there's a burner phone in his gym bag with all his communications with Victoria. But the best part, the absolute chef's kiss moment, was when Brad tried to run and ran straight into Janet, who was just arriving with her overnight bag. "Mom!" he gasped. "Call our lawyer!" Janet looked at him, then at the FBI agents, then at me, standing there fully conscious, and her face went white. "You were supposed to be sedated," she blurted out, then immediately clamped her hand over her mouth. "And there's conspiracy charge number 2. Rebecca said, emerging from behind the agents. "Mrs. Meyer, you're also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse." "Oh yeah, turns out drugging your daughter-in-law for years counts as elder abuse when you're doing it to steal her inheritance. Who knew?" The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, asset recovery, and more paperwork than I'd seen in my entire life. But the sweetest moment came during Brad's trial, when Victoria, trying to save herself, revealed everything about their operation. They had 7 victims across 5 states, with me being the longest-running and most profitable mark. The prosecutor, not Rebecca, due to conflict of interest, but her colleague, presented evidence that made the jury gasp. Brad had kept journals, detailed notes about each woman he'd targeted. My entry started 18 years ago. April. Inherited grandmother's estate, estranged from family, trusting nature, responds well to authority figures. Estimated value, $3.5 million. Timeline, 15 to 20 years to full extraction. I was literally a business plan to him, complete with quarterly projections and risk assessments. Sandra testified via video link, too fragile to travel, but determined to see justice. Monica's sister spoke about finding her body, how the sleeping pills had been switched with a stronger dose without her knowledge. The forensic accountant presented a chart showing the money trail, over $10 million stolen across all victims, though they'd recovered about 60% of it. My favorite moment, though, and yes, I know it's petty, but after 18 years I earned some pettiness, was when Brad's lawyer tried to argue that I'd been a willing participant. "Mrs. Meyer took those pills voluntarily for years," he said. "She gave her husband access to their joint finances. This is a case of marital dispute, not fraud." That's when Martha, our wonderful forensic grandmother, stood up and presented her evidence. Actually, Mr. Meyer started drugging his wife 3 days before she ever saw a doctor about sleep issues. I have the pharmacy records showing he purchased sleeping medication using a forged prescription, then used those pills to create symptoms that would lead to a legitimate prescription. He created the problem, then presented himself as the solution. Brad got 15 years for fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. Victoria got 12 years in deportation after serving her sentence. And Janet? Sweet, concerned mother-in-law Janet got 5 years for conspiracy and elder abuse, though she'll probably be out in 3 with good behavior. The last time I saw her being led away in handcuffs, she had the audacity to say, "This is all your fault, April. If you'd just stayed asleep like you were supposed to." I laughed. Actually laughed out loud in the courtroom, earning a stern look from the judge but sympathetic smiles from the jury. Stay asleep? I'd been asleep for 18 years. It was time to be magnificently, inconveniently, persistently awake. The asset recovery was complex but ultimately successful. The forensic team tracked down accounts in 5 different countries, shell companies layered like a twisted onion, and properties bought with my forged signatures. I got back about $2 million of the $3.5 million stolen, which honestly was more than I'd hoped for. The house had to be sold. Too many memories of being drugged in that bedroom. But I found a lovely condo downtown with excellent security and no medicine cabinet. The other victims and I formed a support group, meeting monthly at a coffee shop that stays open late. We call ourselves the Insomniacs, which is probably too on the nose, but humor helps. Sandra moved closer, and we became unlikely friends, bonding over our shared experience of being married to the same con man. "At least your wedding photos are better," she told me once, looking through my album. "He took me to Vegas. Should have been my first red flag." My health recovery was its own journey. 18 years of unnecessary sleeping medication had done a number on my body. The withdrawal was rough. Insomnia, real insomnia this time, shakes, anxiety attacks. But my doctor, a wonderful woman who'd actually testified at the trial about the long-term effects of involuntary sedation, helped me through it. Your body is remembering how to regulate itself, she explained. Be patient with yourself. The first night I slept naturally, without pills, without fear, without checking 3 times that my doors were locked. I cried. They were tears of relief, of freedom, of finally being safe in my own skin again. I'd forgotten what real sleep felt like. The kind where you drift off naturally, dream normally, wake up when your body is ready. It was magical and ordinary at the same time, which somehow made it even more precious. 6 months after Brad's conviction, I stood in front of a room full of women at our local community center, my hand steady on the podium, my voice clear and strong. My name is April Meyer, and my husband drugged me for 18 years while he stole my inheritance. The gasps from the audience didn't faze me anymore. I'd learned that shock was often the first step toward awareness. I'd started a nonprofit called Wake Up Call, focused on educating people about financial abuse in marriages and the warning signs of coercive control. We offered free financial literacy classes, legal consultation, and most importantly, a safe space for women to ask questions about things that felt off in their relationships without judgment. In just 6 months, we'd helped 12 women discover their husbands were hiding assets, forging signatures, or controlling them through medication or other means. The business was funded partially by the recovered assets, but also by a book deal. Yeah, turns out publishers are very interested in the story of a woman who discovered her husband had been drugging her for 2 decades. Sleeping Beauty's Revenge hit the bestseller list in its 3rd week, and the movie rights were optioned by a production company that promised to handle the subject with sensitivity. We'll see about that, but the option money went straight into the nonprofit. Brad wrote me a letter from prison, 6 months into his sentence. I'd been expecting it. Narcissists can't help themselves. He blamed me for ruining his life, said I'd misunderstood his intentions, that he'd only been trying to protect me from the stress of finances. The delusion was so complete, it was almost fascinating. I sent the letter to my lawyer, who added it to the file for the civil suit. Yes, I was suing him for emotional distress, and yes, I was going to win. The real plot twist came when I was going through old photos for the book, trying to find images from before the drugging began. In our wedding album, tucked behind a photo of Brad and me cutting the cake, I found a note in his handwriting. Phase 1 complete. V says the grandmother's will is ironclad, but patience will pay off. Give it 15 years minimum. Remember, the pills are the key to everything. He'd written his plan down and hidden it in our wedding album. The arrogance was breathtaking. I showed it to Rebecca, who immediately sent it to the prosecutor. It turned out to be evidence in a larger investigation. Brad and Victoria were part of a network of marriage scammers, at least 20 people across the country running similar cons. The FBI ended up calling it Operation Sleeping Beauty, which had a certain poetic justice to it. But here's the thing about waking up after 18 years. The world looks different when you're truly conscious. Colors seem brighter, food tastes better, conversations have more meaning. I started taking art classes, something Brad had always discouraged because it wasn't practical. Turns out I'm actually pretty good with watercolors. Who knew? I also started dating again very carefully with a wonderful man named David, who jokes that he's afraid to give me even aspirin for a headache. I'll just get you an ice pack, he says, and we both laugh because sometimes that's all you can do with trauma. Acknowledge it and keep living. The last time I saw Brad was at his resentencing hearing. Victoria had flipped completely and provided evidence of 3 more victims, adding years to his sentence. He looked smaller somehow in his orange jumpsuit, stripped of his expensive suits and easy charm. When he saw me in the gallery, he actually had the nerve to mouth, "I love you." I mouthed back, "I'm awake," and watched his face crumple as he realized that was the worst thing I could say to him. My sleep these days is natural, earned, peaceful, but sometimes I lie awake by choice, just because I can. I listen to the sounds of the city, Feel the soft sheets, watch the shadows dance on the ceiling. Every moment of consciousness is a gift I gave back to myself, a freedom I fought for, a life I reclaimed. And when morning comes, I make my own tea, chamomile actually, because I still like the taste, and smile at the sunrise I'm actually awake to see. The moral of this story isn't complicated. Trust your instincts. Question sudden changes in your health or awareness. Never let anyone control your access to your own life. And for God's sake, if your spouse insists you need medication to sleep every single night for years on end, get a second opinion, and a third. And maybe a private investigator while you're at it. To everyone watching who's recognized something in my story that resonates with your own life, you're not crazy, you're not overreacting, and it's not all in your head. Sometimes the person who says they love you the most is the one drugging your tea. Sometimes the conspiracy is real, and sometimes waking up is the bravest thing you'll ever do. But here's what I know now, what 18 years of forced unconsciousness taught me. Nobody has the right to steal your awareness, your assets, or your agency. Nobody gets to decide when you sleep, what you forget, or how you live. Your life is yours to be conscious for every messy, beautiful, complicated minute of it. So wake up, stay awake, and never ever let anyone convince you that unconsciousness is for your own good. Brad will be eligible for parole in 12 years. I'll be there at the hearing, wide awake to remind them why he should serve every single day of his sentence. Victoria was deported last month after serving 2 years. Banned from ever returning to the United States. And Janet? She's in minimum security, teaching yoga to other inmates, probably planning her next scheme. But that's their story now, not mine. Mine is about being 53 years old and finally, fully, magnificently awake. And let me tell you, the view from here, it's worth every moment of the fight it took to get here.